Welcome back to Face the Nation, and we are continuing the theme with podcast host and tech watcher Kara Swisher of talking about how technology is really changing so many industries. And you, of course, you've watched this.
Yes.
And you've also interviewed Barry Diller.
Yes,
before,
many times. Dozens of times.
And I was reading an interview you did with him back in 2019, and it almost forecast some of this because he said Hollywood's irrelevant.
He did. He said
the rise of tech companies.
Yeah, I think he said if their children had teeth, their children wouldn't have teeth because they're so inbred and they don't understand what's happening. He had some sort of colorful Barry Diller metaphor about that. But yeah, he's been very prescient and honest, and that's the reason I've known him for so long, because he was one of the first people to contact me from Hollywood, and one of the only. There were just two, Bob Iger and him, about the internet back in the early days, and everyone else thought it would go away. And I kept saying, it's not going away and it's going to keep changing. And that's what's happening now, and it continues. And so Hollywood continues to struggle with the implications of technology, even at this advanced stage.
And that's the streaming and digital ways
that's the latest.
Of using the pipes to get it out to consumers. But it's also the content makers.
Right. Absolutely.
It's that Apple makes content and Amazon.
That's right. They're competing with people with enormous amounts of resources and money that Hollywood doesn't compare to. Last year I interviewed Bob Iger, and he even said Disney was too small. Think about that. Think about the idea that Disney, with its parks and its characters, its IP, has a hard time competing with these tech companies that are getting better and better, whether it's Apple TV or it's Amazon. Obviously Netflix has really plowed the field here, and is now back again in a very strong position as a standalone company versus a Hollywood company.
The CEO of Disney, Bob Iger, got some criticism, certainly from the union, about his comment that this was just sort of the worst possible time to have this kind of negotiation because all of the strain on the industry.
Yeah, I think he's right, but they don't like that message, right? I think he's probably right. At the same time, he earns an enormous salary, so it's easy to point to it and say, what a greedy man, that kind of thing. And I get that, and I think it's important for them to talk about financials, but it almost has nothing to do with what's going on in Hollywood right now, which is this shift to streaming, which is necessary and important, is expensive. The economics aren't worked out. They've overspent. There's enormous competition between and among all the different companies, and nobody's figured out how to pay for people. Now, the actors are correct, is they should get a piece of this, and figuring out who values and who's valuable is going to be very hard. And but there is a real strain on these companies at this moment in time. It doesn't mean it's not going to change, but it certainly is one of those sort of Rubicon moments that Hollywood faces from time to time.
And I'm guessing that the giving everyone a 25% pay cut is not something that proposal from Barry Diller is not going to go anywhere.
No, I don't think so. But they're right in what's their value? Whose value is what, and who contributes to what, and what happens over time when you could use AI and all kinds of things to replicate things rather easily, including writers.
And that's what I want to ask you about is AI, because this isn't just the entertainment industry. This is every industry.
Everything.
People are saying, am I going to be replaced by a robot?
Right. Well, not a robot.
Or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe a robot.
Well, anyway. But on that point, how is the tech industry thinking about this? Because when you hear the calls for legislation, things are not moving swiftly in Congress. They are just now really starting classified briefings on what AI is.
Right. Well, they haven't legislated the old internet yet.
Right.
Not in 25 years. There's not been one piece of legislation, not a privacy, not antitrust, not algorithmic transparency. So I imagine they'll get to this sometime in 2060, 70. I don't know. They find this more interesting, and they're actually moving a little faster because it's a global issue. It's a global issue and a competitive issue with China, for example. And so they're thinking about it because of the implications of AI are much more profound. They're more like the shift, farming shift, the manufacturing shift, the internet shift. So this is a big moment, actually. I know Barry said it was undersung. No, it's not. I
He
thought
said that
crypto.
about Hollywood, but then he didn't when he was talking about publishing.
Yes, publishing, of course. That's right. I think he's right. They're not going to suddenly make, an AI, I don't know, Brad Pitt or something like that. He'll be around until his career is over, essentially, and be fine. But I do think that there's implications on writers and everybody. I mean, someone that in the green room just said, is AI going to kill us? And I'm like, what do you do? He's a lawyer. And I'm like, oh, yeah, kind of, like a lot of what you do. But it's going to change what you do versus, say you're a lawyer writing a contract. It can write a contract and then you can check it and it can write it faster. If you're a PR person, it'll write a press release better and quicker. If you're in journalism, headlines faster and better, and then you can pick it. It's a lot like using a spreadsheet. I keep trying to explain to people, it's like you don't use a calculator anymore, you use a spreadsheet, and you don't think that that's put all these accountants out of business. It just changed their work.
So what is the entry of Elon Musk announcing he has a new firm and also wants China to be, what did he say, on Team Humanity to shape artificial intelligence?
Sure, China's always really good that way.
It's a surveillance state.
It's a surveillance state. I think that. I think it has to be a global solution for a lot of issues, because when you think about things like killer robots, maybe we should all come that AI robots, you need to be thinking about that, and there should be global decisions made as a group of countries discussing what should and shouldn't be used. But every country is competing, and Elon's was early to AI. I've interviewed him many times about it a decade ago, but he was late because he opened AI and he parted ways for a variety of reasons, and then they, of course, launched ChatGPT, et cetera, and Microsoft made the investment. So Elon was ahead, but then he was behind. And so now he's trying to be ahead again after calling for a pause.
Yes, I remember that, a 6-month pause.
I know, it's so funny that he caused for a pause and then started a company.
Then,
one would imagine that was hypocritical if one was of that mind. But
well, there was no pause, right?
There was no pause.
What is his entry, Elon Musk's entry in, he's already entered the social media space through Twitter, but what does the entry of Mark Zuckerberg's new product, Threads, mean for Twitter?
Very bad.
Very bad.
Very bad. First real, there's been a lot of really interesting efforts. I like them all. But this is someone who has an immediate social network that you can tap into, which is Instagram. Very smart way to do it. It's a good product. They're slowly rolling it out. It seems safer. It seems more civil. It's a real, Musk gave Zuckerberg an opening. And if they were, say, in a cage match, he would have had the stuffing knocked out of him at this moment. We'll see if he can recover, but I don't think it can, because advertising is way off. He's created a haven for white supremacists. There's no safety on that platform. And so Mark Zuckerberg can come in and say, oh, look, we have safety. Oh, look, we have a network. And it was really smart of Mark, and he's sort of redefining his narrative, and hopefully he can get it right this time.
Versus Facebook.
Last time, yes. Yeah, exactly.
All the criticism.
Yeah, I think it's not going to be a huge business. It's, maybe $8 to $10 billion for him if he turns on the advertising. And Twitter's gone from $5 billion to maybe $2 billion.
50% drop in revenue.
At least, if not more.
Kara Swisher, it's always great to have you
Anytime.
Here, particularly in person, to help us
Thank
make
you.
sense of these shifts that change our economy, change our politics, change our society. We'll be right back. And we're joined now by the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Texas Republican Representative Mike McCaul. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
I have a lot to get to with you, but I want to start on the National Defense Authorization Act, which passed the Republican-controlled House, and it drew a lot of attention this week because of the social policy issues attached to it. So this is a bill. It pays military personnel. It does things that are necessary for national security. Once this goes to the Senate, they're going to chop out all those things. You know that.
Right.
Comes back to you in the House. Are you confident that Republicans can get this necessary piece of legislation through without having to turn to Democrats to help you get it over the finish line?
We saw this actually when the Democrats had the majority. They passed a very partisan, NDAA bill, went over to the Senate. I'm a conferee to the conference committee. And traditionally, the more, the more partisan amendments get stripped out. At the end of the day, this always ends up as a bipartisan bill. But there were some certain policies, like, for instance, the Hyde Amendment since 1980, not to fund taxpayer abortions, that our members felt was very important to put in there.
Well,
I think that's one that will survive.
Well, you're talking about the provision that would restrict funding to allow service members to travel.
And pay expenses, yeah.
But it doesn't in any way, the Pentagon policy, fund abortions.
Well, I wish they hadn't.
Or fertility services.
Well, they actually kind of started this argument. And look, this is a process. We had a lot of amendments. Our members needed that vote. And I do think at the end of the day, we come together as a conference And it will be a bipartisan bill. I think there's nothing more important than our national defense and our military. We give the largest pay raise in 20 years. We upgrade our triad system, our nuclear capability, hypersonics, a lot to counter China, and particularly in Taiwan. So it's vitally important we not politicize this bill at the end of the day. And I feel very confident we'll have a bipartisan bill coming out.
Okay, because you did vote to eliminate the diversity offices at the Pentagon, to deny transgender troops coverage for hormone therapy, for this restriction on funding for people to get reproductive services, including fertility treatments and abortions, to travel. None of that, you think, ends up?
Well, because that goes against...
Because none of those things will get Democratic.
Well, it goes against, since 1980, we haven't funded anything that goes towards taxpayer, abortions. I think some of the policies on culture that the Defense Department has instituted has caused problems within our own military. Recruitment is an all-time low now. After Afghanistan, and then to watch these videos that these trained, say SEALs have to watch, injecting their own social, moral policies. Let's make it about readiness and our ability to fight a war.
Well, yeah, and that's why the defense secretary said 1 in 5 troops are now female, and that what he put this policy in to be able to do is for them to travel to get things that aren't covered in the states they're living. So shouldn't all troops, regardless of where they're stationed, get the same treatment? Like, why penalize them for living in Texas?
Well, they're
California?
free to travel to another state to have.
They'd be penalized. They'd have to take
an abortion,
off.
just not taxpayer expense.
They'd have to take the time off and the like, and so that would impact their ability to do their jobs, arguably, right? If they have to go on leave. But anyway, I want to also ask you about one of the things that was in there, or not in there, but many conservative members of your caucus wanted it to, and those are restrictions on funding for Ukraine. What does that indicate about what Republicans will get over the finish line in the fall in terms of an actual supplemental to help Ukraine?
Right. Well, you know my position on Ukraine. We should have, a year ago, been putting in the weapons we're putting in just now.
Right.
For victory, not just to survive. There were several Ukraine amendments. They all failed. And I would say the majority of Republicans voted to support Ukraine. At the end of the day, the Reagan Institute did a great poll that showed that over 70% of Republicans support Ukraine. I think that was reflected in our vote. Yes, we had about 70 members that voted against it, but I do think when it comes back, you're going to see a more bipartisan support for things like our efforts in Ukraine, particularly as we're in the counteroffensive. To me, it's very dangerous to have these amendments when Ukraine is in the crossfire trying to push the aggression of Russia back in the counteroffensive.
You're talking about amendments like what Marjorie Taylor Greene was trying to attach.
Correct.
And Republicans did oppose this thing that
we did, and it failed, and I think that's good news.
You've been pushing for longer range missile systems like ATACMS. Do you have enough funding in this current allotment or what you can put together in the fall to continue the pace of weapons?
Sure. It was already appropriated in the supplemental last year, the $90 billion. I mean, it's a drawdown authority. We have ATACMS. So I have great sources on the ground, and they're telling me right now, because of the mines and the fortifications, that what they need, the cluster munitions are going to help with, killing Russians in the field. However, they need the longer range artillery to hit the depots, the energy, the logistical supply lines. They don't have that, and they don't have air cover. And that's really important here, because the F-16s were held back so long by the administration and the pilot training that they don't have what they need to win in this counteroffensive, and it's really sad.
I want to ask you quickly about Iran. You've been vocal in asking the administration for a briefing on the presidential envoy, Rob Malley, and why he is suspended. Do you have any promise that you'll get it, that you'll get information?
Well, I sent a letter. We were rebuked. We have been given no answer about his status. Remember, this is the top negotiator to Iran on one of the most, a nuclear weapons program, highest classified secrets. So we are giving a deadline of July 25th to have, the diplomatic security and management secretary come in and brief us in a classified space. Margaret, I can't tell you how important this is, because if he somehow, worst case scenario, if he transferred intelligence and secrets to our foreign nation adversaries.
But there's no proof of that. at this point.
There is no proof of that. But if he did,
Yeah.
that would be treason in my view.
Unfortunately, I have to leave it there because we have a hard out here, but more to talk to you about always. We'll be right back.
Thanks, Margaret.
We turn now to President Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, who we spoke with earlier about the latest Chinese cyber hack.
This was an intrusion actually into Microsoft's cloud system, and they went in through that to get into the unclassified email system of U.S. government agencies. It was actually the U.S. government that discovered the intrusion, alerted Microsoft, shut it down, and we're taking steps to make sure that that's not a vulnerability going forward. We have seen this kind of thing before many times over many administrations, and we take steps to try to hold the relevant actors responsible, and we'll do so in this case.
They're China-based actors, according to Microsoft. Do you have any reason to dispute that?
No, I have no reason to dispute what Microsoft is saying.
The Treasury Secretary told us that China's decision to cut off ingredients for computer chips starting August 1st may be retaliatory for some of the actions the U.S. has taken to restrict tech sales to China. Do you see this as tit-for-tat moves here? Are we in a period of escalation despite your diplomatic outreach?
Look, I can't get inside the heads of the Chinese decision makers, so I'm not sure what was motivating them. What I do know is that I think it's a self-defeating move because I believe that it will only reinforce the determination of many other countries in the world to de-risk, to find ways to reduce dependencies and increase the resilience of their own supply chains, including for the kinds of critical minerals that are at issue in this particular decision. So from our perspective, we are being clear and transparent about the steps we're taking. We're not looking to end all trade with China. What we're looking to do is have a small yard of restrictions on technology with national security implications and a high fence around that yard. That's what we're going to continue to do. And China, of course, will have to make its own decisions.
Staying in Asia, we saw this week that North Korea appears to have taken a significant step towards an intercontinental ballistic missile that could put the U.S. within range of a nuclear weapon, potentially. Are you concerned that they will carry out another nuclear test in the coming weeks?
I have been concerned for some time that North Korea would conduct what would be its 7th nuclear test going back multiple administrations. And I remain concerned about that. I don't see any immediate indications that that's going to happen, but it would not come as a surprise if North Korea moved forward with another nuclear test. With respect to its intercontinental ballistic missile capability, this is a capability they began testing several years ago. They have continued to test it. We watch all of those tests very closely to see how it is developing. And we could coordinate extremely closely with our allies, with Japan and Korea, to make sure that we are responding in lockstep to this threat.
Have you made any new diplomatic overtures since this test in order to negotiate with Pyongyang or talk to them at all?
Not since this test, but over the course of the Biden administration, we have indicated to North Korea that we're prepared to sit down and talk without preconditions about their nuclear program. And we've also made clear to China that it is the United States who is ready for diplomacy and North Korea who is not. So from our perspective, China has a role to play here too, given its relationship with North Korea, to indicate to the North Koreans that its continued testing is destabilizing and frankly is in fact only creating circumstances in which the United States, our allies and partners, have to step up our activities and posture to respond to the threat.
You are just back from Europe, where the president was at this NATO summit. On the diplomatic front, though, there are other issues as well, including the expiration of what's known as this Black Sea initiative to allow for ships carrying food leaving Ukraine to safely pass without Russia attacking them. Is there any sign from Vladimir Putin that he is willing to extend this?
Look, I can't predict what Vladimir Putin will do. He has been all over the map with respect to this initiative over the course of the past many months. It is possible that Russia pulls out of it. It is possible they continue. If, in fact, they pull out of it, the rest of the world will take a look at that and say that Russia has turned its back on ensuring that the countries of the global south and Africa and Latin America and Asia can get the food they need at affordable prices. And I think that will come at an enormous diplomatic cost to Russia going forward. So this is a choice Vladimir Putin's going to have to make. We are prepared for any scenario, and we're working closely with the Ukrainians on that.
Okay, because it's set to expire at midnight tomorrow. In terms of the promises made at NATO, there was this general pledge to potentially allow Ukraine to join in the future. Are you concerned that that will shape a negotiation potentially with Russia to end the conflict, where they are incentivized to just drag this out?
The Ukrainians are currently, as we speak, bravely and courageously pushing against the Russian lines in the south and in the east. They are inflicting enormous damage on the Russian forces. The West is working to continue to tighten the squeeze of our sanctions, hollowing out Russia's defense industrial base, weakening its capacity to produce advanced technology. We will continue to put economic pressure on Russia, and the Ukrainians will continue to put military pressure on Russia. So I think in the end, if Russia chooses to continue fighting in this war, it will come at a grave cost to Russia, and Ukraine will continue to make progress on the battlefield. In the meantime, we are going to make sure that Ukraine has the support it needs for as long as it takes, and that is a message that came out of the NATO summit. And finally, yes, we said at NATO, very simply, Ukraine's future is in NATO. We meant it. That's not up for negotiation. That's something that now all 31 allies have committed to.
Not up for negotiation. Okay. On Iran, before I let you go, you've said that the administration is trying to put Iran's nuclear program back in the box, ultimately through some diplomatic effort. Are you close to any type of understanding on that front, and any type of understanding that would allow for the 4 Americans to be released?
We have tried very hard to secure the release of the 4 unjustly detained Americans in Iran. We have done so since the day that President Biden took office. We have had indirect contacts with Iran on this in an effort to try to get a deal that could get them released. We have not arrived at an understanding that would get them out at this point. We are continuing to work at it.
And by understanding in terms of the nuclear program, this would not be any kind of written agreement. We are not close to any kind of actual deal.
With respect to the nuclear program, we're not close to any kind of a deal.
May I quickly ask you about Rob Malley, the president's envoy? Is he coming back to the administration? We understand he's being suspended as the security clearance is being reviewed.
Rob Malley has served multiple administrations faithfully and well. He is a public servant. He is a diplomat. He is engaged in high-level, high-stakes diplomacy for a long time. And he's someone who a lot of us, including myself, have deep respect for. I can't speak to the current circumstances. I have to refer you to the State Department on that.
All right. Jake Sullivan, thank you for joining us today. We'll be back with a lot more Face the Nation, so stay with us. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. I'm Margaret Brennan.